Alright, we got some of the friends, some of the chevre out in the park making a shtickle noise. They're making a shtickle noise, you know. What do you want me to tell you? Alright. Friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Daled, Daf 4 of Masechta Yevamos. Okay, friends, Daf 4 is kind of okay. Don't worry. Daf 4 is actually kind of awesome a little bit. Yeah. Wow. Let's just can we take a second to reflect on Daf Beis and Gimel for a second? Daf Beis was insane, right? That was crazy. Daf Gimel, I don't know. I think I was still a little bit confused by Daf Beis. I was in a little bit of a haze. Daf Daled Lemais is Gishmak. Basically, Daf Daled, we get into the concept of Ahsay, dokhe, sahsay. And where we have a proof for that, Lemais, it's going to continue for several daf. We get into halachos of tzitzis and shatnez. Very interesting stuff, Lemais. Very interesting stuff, friends. So we're going to start on Daf Gimel Amud Beis, about 5-6 lines from the bottom. From the bottom, it says, "Time of the kosav achmana aleh." Right, but the truth is, Lemais, these friends in the park, they could be a shtickle distraction. One second, let me look at it out the window and evaluate the situation. 1 second. Okay, so upon further investigation, I don't know, somebody's making noise in the park. What do you want me to tell you? But we got a daf to learn. So the Gemara says, "Time of the kosav achmana aleh halavachi avamina achos isha miyabma my timer tamina asi ese v'dachi lo sahsay." Whoa, friends, what in the world does that mean? Wow. Okay, well, we said yesterday that the source for Yibum is really from, the source of all these arayos that are not allowed is from Achos Isha. Right? No, what did it say? It said at the top of the Amud. It said, if we go back earlier at the top of the Amud, 7 lines into the page, it's Minani Mili. How do we know all this stuff? So the Tana Rabbanan Isha alachosa lo sikach litzor legalo servosa aleh, that your wife and her sister you can't be with, right? So it says by the Arayas, right? It says, where is this, in Parshas Kedoshim or something? It says in the Arayas, it says you're not allowed to marry your wife and your wife's sister, and it says there, upon her, and then it says by Yibum, it says Yevamo yavo aleho, that her Yavam will come to her. So therefore, it says in the context of Arayos, it says aleho in the when it's talking about your wife's sister, that you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister. And also in the context of Yibum, it says aleh. It says Yevamo yavo aleh. So what we learn from there is that even in the context of Yibum, so still your wife's sister is still going to be considered an erva, because as I pointed out over the past day or two, that the whole concept of Yibum is something that, generally speaking, is not allowed. Aside from the fact that it's kind of out there, but generally speaking, you're not allowed to marry your brother's wife, right? If your brother gets divorced from his wife, you're not allowed to marry her. Yet, the chiddush of Yibum is that because they didn't have any children, you want to continue your brother's name, so that sort of erva gets sort of waived, right? And now what ends up happening is you do marry your brother's wife. So now, I hope I didn't say your brother's sister, your brother's wife. So now, so kind of the whole chiddush of Yibum is that kind of this person who would generally be considered an erva, you're allowed to nonetheless become married to in the context of Yibum. So therefore, I might think that maybe all the arayos are permitted in the context of Yibum, and I might think that my wife's sister, if it comes out to Yibum, right? So for example, if Reuven is married to Sarah, Shimon's married to Rivke. Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Sarah and Rivke are sisters. Reuven dies. So I might think, well, just like Shimon would be able to, right, does Yibum with Ruvain's widow, even, right, well, in a situation where Sarah and Rivka don't have any relation to each other, so then, Yibum would state that Shimon would marry Ruvain, would be Miyabim, Ruvain's widow, even though it's his brother's wife. So I might think that just like, your brother's wife, you do Yibum with, so maybe also if Sarah and Rivka were sisters, so maybe in the context of Yibum, you would even do Yibum with Sarah, even though it's your wife's sister. And even though in general, you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister, but because it's Yibum, maybe I would think it's allowed. So therefore we have the Gezerah Shava of, it says, Aleo by Yevamos Yava Aleo. Some guy's yelling outside. And it also says Aleo by your wife's sister. To teach that even in the context of Yibum, still your wife's sister is not going to be allowed. Wow, this guy's really, really yelling. I really hope that this guy stops yelling, because otherwise it's going to be distracting to me, which is Memela then going to become distracting for you. So I might think that in the context of Yibum, I would be allowed to do Yibum with my wife's sister. So therefore it says Yevamos Yava Aleo, it says Isha Lechos Lo Tzikach Litzor Legalo Sevoso Aleo, it says Aleo in both. So therefore the point is that even in the context of Yibum, you do not do Yibum with your wife's sister. Okay, fine. So now back in the Gemara. So time the Kosev Achmana Aleo. So we want to say, okay, how do I know that I do not do Yibum with my wife's sister? So because it says Aleo to teach, right, a Gezerah Shava of Aleo, to teach that even by Yevamos Yavo Aleo, by Yibum, still the Arayos would apply when it comes to your wife's sister, that you would not do Yibum. Halav Hochi, with the implication being that if I don't have the Gezerah Shava, right, I need the Gezerah Shava to teach me this. If I didn't have the Gezerah Shava, Hava Amina, Achos Isha Miyabu, then I would assume that I would do Yibum with my wife's sister. My time. Why? Why would I assume that I would do Yibum with my wife's sister? After all, it's an erva. Right? It says, right? What did it say? Isha lechosa lo sikach litzor legala servasa. Don't marry your wife's sister. So why would I think that if not for the fact that we have the Gezerah Shava of Aleo, why would I think that I would do Yibum with my wife's sister? The Aminan, because we say Ahsay dokhe lo sahsay, that will say, well, we have a positive commandment of Yevamos Yavo Aleo, a positive commandment of Yibum, and we have a negative commandment of don't marry your wife's sister. So I would think that Ahsay dokhe lo sahsay, that a positive commandment would override the negative commandment, and therefore we would do Yibum even though it's your wife's sister. Now, fact the Gemara, Amar de Amrinon Ahsay dokhe lo sahsay greda. Now the Gemara suggests though, it says, but still, maybe I would argue that when do we say that a positive commandment sort of overrides a negative commandment? When it's simply a negative commandment. However, this isn't simply a negative commandment. Lo sahsay sheish bo karetz midachi. But why would I assume that a regular mitzvahs essay like Yevamos Yavo Aleo would override not just any regular lo ta'aseh, but it's a mitzvahs lo sahsay that has kares associated with it. If you marry your wife, if you sleep with your wife's sister, there's a chiyuv kares. So maybe I would not assume that the asay of Yibum would necessarily override the lo ta'aseh of erva, because it's not just a regular lo ta'aseh of your wife's sister, but it's a lo ta'aseh that has kares associated with visu, and more so lo sahsay greda minalim dokhe. So now here we go. This is really we had a lot of technical stuff in those 5 lines. Those 5 lines that were 10 minutes, which is a lot. But al kopanim, that is really sort of the entryway into the gateway into today's discussion, which is how do we know the concept of Ahsay dokhe lo sahsay, that a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. And a regular negative commandment, right? It says, V'su lo sahsay greda minalan. How do we know, right? At least just sticking to the simple case, right? Meaning, we were assuming, right? The Gemara a second ago was assuming, sure, Ahsay dokhe lo ta'asay. A positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. We weren't sure if a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment that has a punishment of kares. That we weren't sure about. But we were pretty darn sure that a positive commandment overrides a regular old negative commandment. Why? Right? V'su lo taise greda minalan dokhe. How do I know that a mitzvah that a mitzvah's essay is going to be dokhe, just a regular mitzvah's lo sahsay? Here we go. Tichsev, as the pasuk says in Parshas Kiseitze in Sefer Devarim, lo silba shatnez gedilim taiselach. Don't wear shatnez. Don't wear shatnez. Make for yourself tzitzis. Ve'amar Rabbi Elazar, and says Rabbi Elazar, smuchim min haTorah minayin. How do we know that we can learn juxtapositions in the Torah? Shenemar, as the pasuk says, smuchim la'ad olam asuyim be'emes v'yasher. The pasuk says in Tehillim, it says that there are juxtapositions that are made in truth and straightness. All right, what do you want me to tell you? So it teaches that you can learn out things based on their juxtaposition. Let's go weiter. V'amar Rav Sheshes, Amar Rabbi Elazar, and it says Rav Sheshes is the name of Rabbi Elazar, Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Excuse me, I just got to rub my nose. All right, excuse me. Minayin li Yevamos shenaflu fleimu kashrin. Oh, so what if Ruvain was married to Sarah, Ruvain dies. Here's the thing, Shimon is a mukashchin. Ruvain's brother Shimon is somebody who Sarah does not feel comfortable being married to. He's he's got physical abnormalities that it would be very difficult for Sarah to live with. And so she'ein chos min osa, that we don't sort of quiet her, right? We don't say, quiet you have no choice, you have to marry Shimon. We don't say that. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, lo sachsum shor bedisho. Well, because the pasuk also, I believe in Parshas Kiseitze, I think, maybe, says lo sachsum shor bedisho, that you're not allowed to muzzle an ox when it is threshing. And it says right after that, that basically talks about Yibum. So Kilu, literally right before the Torah discusses Yibum, it says Lo Sachsum Shor Bedisho, that you don't muzzle an ox when it is threshing. So the point is, what we learn out from the juxtaposition of the two psukim is that in the context of Yibum, if Sarah is not interested in being with Shimon, so then we don't try to persuade her to be with Shimon. We simply say, people do chalitza, based on that juxtaposition. V'amar of Yosef, and says of Yosef, afilu man delo darish smuchim ba'alma b'mishneh Torah darish, and says, right, this is all getting at the fact that we hold of the concept of smuchin, right, of things, of juxtapositions, right, as we just learned a second ago, that by Yibum, based on the juxtaposition of lo sachsum shor bedisho, right, being right before Yibum, so that's how we know that we do not try to convince Sarah to be with Shimon, rather we just do chalitza. So we're trying to get at the fact that when it says lo silba shatnez gedilim taiselach, that it says don't wear shatnez, don't wear wool and linen together, and then it says right afterwards, gedilim taiselach, make tzitzis. The point being that the positive commandment of making tzitzis overrides the negative commandment of lo silba shatnez, and that therefore you're even allowed to make tzitzis out of shatnez. So for example, if you have a linen garment, you can have woolen strings and call that tzitzis, and that would be fine. Right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the case, we're trying to build the case that if we say that if we learn smuchin, if we learn juxtapositions, so then we can learn the juxtaposition of lo silba shatnez and gedilim taiselach to say that the positive commandment of making tzitzis overrides the negative commandment of shatnez, and therefore we learn out Ahsay dokhe lo ta'asay. That is what we're trying to get at. And now says Rav Yosef that even according to the one who does not generally learn of juxtapositions, he does learn of juxtapositions, however, in Mishneh Torah, in Sefer Devarim, which is where this juxtaposition of shatnez and tzitzis is found. Rabbi Yehuda ba'alma lo darsh, because Rabbi Yehuda, after all, his opinion is that in general we do not hold of smuchin. We do not say that just because two verses are juxtaposed, that the juxtaposition of two verses does not mean that we can draw conclusions. Uv Mishneh Torah darish. However, in Sefer Devarim, Rabbi Yehuda does hold of juxtapositions. Uva alma minolin de lo darish. How do we know that in general Rabbi Yehuda does not hold of juxtapositions? The Tanya, as we learn in a Brisa, Ben Ahsay Omer says, Ben Ahsay, Nema machshefer lo sahsay. It says that you cannot allow a machshefer. What's a machshefer? Like a witch, I think, to live. V'namar, and the pasuk says right afterwards, Kol shochiv be'ema mos yumos, then anybody who lies with an animal must surely die. Somchu in Inyan Lo, they juxtaposed the killing machshefers to killing people who sleep with animals. So just like somebody who lies with an animal, the punishment is stoning. So also a machshefer, a witch, gets stoned. Alright, what do you want me to tell you? So Ben Ahsay learns out from juxtapositions that a machshefer gets stoned. Omar le Rabbi Yehuda. Now Rabbi Yehuda says to Ben Ahsay, interesting. Oh, says Rabbi Yehuda, you really think that just because these two psukim, which are in Sefer Shmos, you think that just because these two psukim happen to be one after the next, we're going to say that a machshefer we're now going to stone? I mean, stoning, according to the rabbis, is the most serious of all the four capital punishments, right? We saw yesterday that according to Reb Shimon, the most severe of the capital punishments is sreifa, is burning. But according to the rabbis, according to the Chacham, the Tanna Kama Darin, they say that the most serious is stoning. And says Rabbi Yehuda, he has a problem over here. He says, you really think that just because the pasuk of machshefers is written right next to the pasuk of somebody who lies with an animal, so then just like lying with an animal is punishable by stoning, so also a machshefer gets stoning just because of the juxtaposition? Ella, rather, argues Rabbi Yehuda, Ov v'yidoni b'chlal kol machshefim hoyu. Ov v'yidoni, which is, special types of necromancy. Is that like a type of thing that would be similar to like machshefers and witches? I don't know. What's necromancy? Anyways, Ov v'yidoni, they could do all sorts of fancy magical things. So they were included in regular machshefers, in regular witchcraft kind of stuff. V'lomo yotzu. So then how come they were singled out? If it already says machshefer lo sahsay, if it already says that you can't allow a machshefer to live, so why do I also need to say, right? Why do I also need to point out that by Ov v'yidoni yirgum osam dmeim bam, as Rashi points out, that you have to stone them? So lehakish loim v'lomar loch. Well, we single out Ov v'yidoni to compare to the rest of the machshefers, to say to you, ma'ov v'yidoni b'skila, that just like Ov v'yidoni is stoning af machshefer b'skila, also machshefer is going to be, a witch is going to be stoned. So we see that this juxtaposition of machshefers and people lying with animals is found in Sefer Shmos. And Rabbi Yehuda says, look, just because these two verses happen to be next to each other, that is not a strong enough argument to say that a machshefer gets stoned. Rather, he learned it out from something that was included in the general rule and left it right. As we're going to learn more of in the coming days. But basically, when you have something that was initially included in the general rule, such as Ov v'yidoni was just included in regular machshefers, and then it was taken out of the context and specified. So it's to teach about the whole thing and to say that just like over Yidoni is with skila, is with stoning, so all machshefers get stoned. Who've Mishnah Torah Medalim to Darish, and how do we know that Rabbi Yehuda does nonetheless hold of the concept of juxtapositions in Mishnah Torah, in Sefer Devarim? Titnan, as we learn in a Mishnah, no se adam anusas aviv umefutas aviv, a fellow is allowed to marry a woman who was raped by his father or seduced by his father. So the son would be allowed to marry this woman. Anusas beno, right? So Yaakov, right? If Yaakov raped or seduced Sarah, so his son Reuven would be allowed to marry her. Sarah, Anusas beno, mufutas beno. If Reuven raped or seduced Sarah, so Yaakov, his father, would be allowed to marry her. Rabbi Yehuda oser banusas aviv mufutas aviv. Rabbi Yehuda says no, not true. If Yaakov raped or seduced Sarah, so Reuven would not be allowed to marry Sarah. From Rav Gidol Marav, it says Rav Gidol in the name of Rav, my time with Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say that Reuven would not be allowed to marry Sarah, who was raped or seduced by Yaakov? Dichsiv, as the pasuk says, Lo yikach ish as eishes aviv, a fellow should not marry the wife of his father, v'lo yigale knaf aviv, and he also should not reveal the garment of his father. Konav shira aviv, the garment that his father saw, lo yigale, he should not reveal. Umimayde banusaksiv, and how do you know that it's talking about a situation of rape and seduction? Meilave dekra, because if you look at the previous pasuk, it says Dichsiv v'noson isha shochiv ima la'avi anayre chamishim kosef, that the pasuk talks about a person who rapes an unmarried girl. So it says that he pays the father 50 silver coins and then they remain married. V'samuchle, and it says afterwards, and it says afterwards lo yikach ish v'gomer. And it says, basically the next pasuk that says, So therefore Rabbi Yehuda learns from the juxtaposition of the situation of rape right next to the situation of it means that Reuven would not be allowed to marry a woman raped by his father Yaakov. Okay, so we see that Rabbi Yehuda does hold of juxtapositions in Sefer Devarim Rabbanon. According to the rabbis who argued on Rabbi Yehuda, right, the Tanakama, who says that Reuven would be allowed to marry Sarah. So Rabbanon, you have a samachle kidika amart. Look, if it was a exact juxtaposition, so sure, but hashad lo samachle, but it's not an exact juxtaposition because it says lo yikach ish es eishes aviv v'lo yigale knaf aviv, that between sort of the previous verse which mentioned rape and when the pasuk says v'lo yigale knaf aviv, there were other words in between which was lo yikach ish es eishes aviv, so that kind of divides it up according to the rabbi, and that therefore precludes makes sense. It doesn't allow us to make that juxtaposition because there was something in the middle. So hashad lo samachle b'shomeres Yevamos kosum medaber v'laver olav b'shnei lavin. Rather, the rabbis will say that lo yigale knaf aviv is talking about something else. It is not talking about a woman who was raped by Yaakov. Rather, it is talking about a shomeres Yavam. That if Sarah was awaiting Yibum with Yaakov, right? So, for example, if let's say Yaakov's brother was Yitzchak, and Yitzchak died, and he was married to Sarah, so now Sarah needs to do Yibum with Yaakov. If Reuven then sleeps with Sarah, so then there are two problems there. A, it is his father's brother's wife, right? Is Uncle Yitzchak's wife, and secondly, it is the this woman who needs to marry, right, who's Shomeres Yavam, she needs to do Yibum with his father, so he'll be violating two laws according to the rabbis. That's what we learn out from Lo Yigale Knaf Aviv. So, friends, to tie it all back up, what did we learn? We learned that basically, we learn of smuchim, right? Juxtapositions. And even Rabbi Yehuda, who in general does not hold of juxtapositions, in Sefer Devarim, he does hold of juxtapositions. And sure enough, when it says, Lo silba shatnis, dilim taiselach, don't wear wool and linen together, but do make tzitzis. So right, that's in Sefer Devarim. So basically everyone is going to say that we're going to learn the juxtaposition there and say that even though in general you do not wear wool and linen, it's a negative commandment, right? Lo silba shatnis, do not wear wool and linen together. Nonetheless, gedilim taiselach, you can make tzitzis even if it's wool and linen, even if it's, let's say, a linen garment and woolen threads, that would be permitted because Ahsay, dokhe lo ta'asay, that a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. So there you have it, the concept of Ahsay, dokhe lo ta'asay from tzitzis. And now, effective Gemara, Uv Mishneh Torah, my time at the Dorish. How come Rabbi Yehuda does learn smuchin in Mishneh Torah, right? We said that Rabbi Yehuda generally does not hold of smuchin, juxtapositions, but in Sefer Devarim he does. How come? So, well, either because it's obvious that we're meant to learn something out, or because it's extra, and therefore, why is this extra thing written in the Torah? It must be to teach us something. We're going to explain what this means. So, either we could say it's because it's obvious. Now, so we're talking about now v'lo yigala knaf aviv, right? So Rabbi Yehuda had said that when we learn out from lo yigala knaf aviv, it's talking about that Reuven cannot marry Sarah if she was raped by his father Yaakov. So Rabbi Yehuda learned that out from the juxtaposition of the previous pasuk had said that was discussing a situation of rape, and then the next pasuk says, do not marry your father's wife and do not reveal the garment of your father. So Rabbi Yehuda says, how do we know that this is talking about that in this case we would learn out smuchin, this juxtaposition? So he says, well, it's muchach, it's obvious, because the im kain lichtevei rachmana gabe arayos. What is this pasuk of arayos doing here? I believe this is in Parshas Kiseitze, right? Yeah. So I mean the parshas of forbidden relationships are in Kedoshim, are in Achremos. What's this doing here in the middle of nowhere in Parshas Kiseitze? So it's pretty random. It must mean to teach us smuchin, right? It's obvious, it's muchach, it's clear that it's to teach us that we should learn from the juxtaposition of it in this completely random place, that it's to teach us that we should, juxtapose the two verses. Or you could say that the pasuk is simply, available, it's extra. Right? It could just say, do not marry your father's wife. Why does it say, why does it have to say, do not reveal the garment of your father? It's because that verse is extra to teach that, to teach the juxtaposition of rape to the Leigala Knafaviv. So we see that according to Rabbi Yehuda, he learns out smuchin either because the verse is obvious, or because it's extra and available. Shmamina lafnuye, fine. V'gabe tzitzis nami, and similarly by tzitzis, right? Because we said that Rabbi Yehuda, even though in general he does not hold of smuchin, in Sefer Devarim he does hold of smuchin. And one case was the lo yigala knafaviv, the other case was tzitzis, right? That because shatnis is juxtaposed with tzitzis, we say that tzitzis overrides shatnis, and you can make tzitzis even with wool and linen together. So v'gabe tzitzis nami, also by tzitzis, either, I can argue either because it's obvious or because the pasuk is available. So I could argue that it's obvious the imkain lichtavei rachmana gabi parshas tzitzis, because Gedilim Taisalach over here, right? Make yourself tzitzis is in a completely random place. The parsha of tzitzis, right, which we say every day as part of Kretschmer, as part of Kriyas Shema, is in Dvar, is in Bamidbar, in Parsha Shlach. At the end of Parsha Shlach, it's the maftir of Parsha Shlach, Danny Friedenberg's Bar Mitzvah Parsha. So that is where the any verses related to tzitzis should be there. How come we are writing it here in the middle of nowhere in Parshas Kiseitze? It must mean to teach us smuchin, that juxtapose it to shatnis, to say that tzitzis overrides shatnis. Or you could say because there is an extra verse there that really doesn't need to be written at all. Michdei, let's see, regarding shatnis. Uvegid kilayim shatnis lo yayle alecha. It says in Sefer Vayikra, I think in Parshas Kedoshim, it says, Uvegid kilayim shatnis lo yayle alecha, do not wear shatnis. Lo silba shatnis lomali, shmamina la'afnuye. So, says the Gemara, that really, when the pasuk says in Sefer Devarim in Parshas Kiseitzi lo silba shatnis, don't wear shatnis, what's that pasuk doing there? We already have a pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim that says Uvegid kilayim shatnis lo yayle alecha, don't wear shatnis. So why are we repeating ourselves in Sefer Devarim lo silba shatnis? So shmamina la'afnuye. Well, it is the point is that, well, the truth is we don't need to repeat ourselves in Sefer Devarim. That pasuk of lo silba shatnis is extra, and because it's extra, we can learn the juxtaposition. So, right, we can use it for saying, well, it must be teaching us that we should juxtapose lo silba shatnis to Gedilim Taisalach, and to say that make tzitzis even if it's shatnis, and Ahsay dokhe lo sahsay. Fine. Perfect the Gemara 1 second. Hani mitzvah tzriche. Wait a minute. There's no extra verses here. I need both of them. I need uvegid kilayim shatnis lo yayle alecha, and I need lo silba shatnis. I need both of those psukim that say don't wear shatnis. Because if I would only have the verse from Sefer Vayikra, from Parshas Kedoshim, if I don't say lo yayle alecha, don't put it on you, I would think that means full stop. Havamina kol derech ha'aloya osur, that I can't put it on at all. Asur achmana. V'afilu mochrei ksus, even if you're selling wool and linen garments, you'd be unable to put them on, right? And we've learned in the past that somebody who's selling wool and linen garments, he's allowed to put them on, so that he could walk around and sell them. Now, right? I think we had said, but you can't, use it to protect him from the sun in the summer and the rain in the winter. That would not be allowed, because then you'd be getting benefit. But if it's just to sell them, you'd be allowed to put them on. So the Gemara is asking, look, if I would only have the verse in Sefer Vayikra, Uvegid kilayim shatnis lo yayle alecha, I might think you can't put it on ever, even if you're a salesman. So because of Achmana lo silba shatnis. So therefore we have the second pasuk in Kiseitze, don't wear shatnis. Dumi de levisha diz be'anoyo, that you have to wear the shatnis, you have to get benefit from the shatnis in order for it to be asur. Because of Achmana lo silbash, and if the pasuk would only say don't wear shatnis, hava amina davka levisha dunafish anayosa, I might think specifically wearing shatnis where you're getting a significant amount of benefit, that's what's not allowed. Aval ha'alo, but if I have like a shawl that's made out of shatnis and I just wrap it around myself, maybe that would be okay. Therefore the pasuk says don't put it on even as like a shawl. So the Gemara asks, there's no extra verses over here. I need both of them. I need lo yayle alecha, I need lo silba shatnes, I need both of them to teach me that I can't wear it, to teach me that specifically it needs to be kind of wearing, but like a salesman would be okay, but kind of wearing it as a shawl would not be okay. We learn out different halachas from the two psukim. So there's no extra psukim to teach me juxtapositions. So imkein lichtor v'achmanu lo silba shatnes. Look, if all we needed from the verse in Parshas Kiseitze was that it's also right, that you have to kind of get some level of benefit from it, well then all it should say is lo silba shatnes tzemeru fishtim lomali. How come I need it to say tzemeru fishtim? Right? How come I need it to say tzemeru fishtim? Because after all, michdei, because if we look at the verse in Sefer Vayikra, kosavu veged kilayim shatnis lo yayla alecha, because it already says in the verse in Sefer Vayikra that do not wear a beged, a garment of shatnis. V'tanat Rabbi Shmuel, who's taught in the Bismedrish of Rabbi Shmuel, hol v'nemu b'Torah stam begadim. Since the Torah writes, just in general about garments, about begadim, and it says, as Rashi points out, in the context of Negoim, 2 lines into the thin lines of Rashi, it says regarding tsaras of the garments, it says whether it's a garment of wool or whether it's a garment of linen. So therefore, it says the Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel, it says, they taught in the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Shmuel, that since the Torah mentions begadim, beged, garments in general, but in the context of tsaras, it specifies beged semer or beged pishtim, that we're talking about a garment of wool or a garment of linen, afkol semer ufishtim. So therefore, whenever it says beged, garment, it means memele, wool and linen. So therefore, says the Gemara, if I would only have the pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim when it says uveged kilayim shatnis lo yayla alecha, so I know that means don't wear wool and linen together, because it says ubeged kilayim shatnis, and beged always means wool and linen, and therefore tzemeru fishim dechasav achmana lamali. So sorry, I'm rubbing my nose again. So then why does it say tzemer ufish, right? Lo silba shatnes tzemer ufishtim. Right? Meaning, right? We had said a minute ago that I need both verses because, one is to, if it only said lo yayla lecha, I might even think that sale, it's not allowed for salesmen. Therefore it says, right, lo silba shatnes, you have to get some kind of level of benefit, but then we also learned we need the other pasuk to teach like wearing it as a shawl. So we said initially that we need both verses, but then the Gemara pointed out, but do we really need both verses in their entirety? I could theoretically just get away and say for Devarim in Parshas Kiseitze when it says lo silba shatnes. Why do I need the pasuk to continue tzemeru fishtim yachtav? I already know from the first verse that when it says beged kilayim shatnes, beged, in general, a beged, as we learned from tsaras, is tzemeru fishtim, is wool and linen. So when it says uveged kilayim shatnes, that means a garment of wool and linen. So mimele, I already know then that when it says lo silba shatnes, that means don't wear wool and linen. So tzemeru fishtim dechasav achmana lamali. Why does the pasuk then say lo silba shatnes tzemeru fishtim, wool and linen? Shma mina la'afnuye. So we see that tzemeru fishtim is extra, and it's to teach juxtaposed tzemeru fishtim yachtav to what comes immediately afterwards, kedilim taiselach, to say that based on the juxtaposition, say that you can even have shatnes for tzitzis. But vakate itztuch, 1 second, I still need even tzemeru fishtim. I may have thought to say, look, ha'Allah hi to lo nafish hana also. I might think, look, if I only had the first verse of uveged kilayim shatnes lo yayla alecha, don't wear a beged of shatnes, and beged means tzemeru fishtim, wool and linen, which means that shatnes is essentially limited to wool and linen. So I might think, fine, when it says uveged kilayim shatnes lo yayla alecha, don't put it on, which is not necessarily getting so much benefit, maybe like a shawl, right? You kind of wrap it around yourself. So in that case, shatnes is limited to wool and linen. But if you're mamish wearing it, where there's a lot of benefit, so I might think that any two materials, right? Maybe shatnes just means any two materials are not allowed. That's why I had to say, lo silba shatnez tzemer ufishtim. So therefore, right, it says the pasuk again. Look, it says the Gemara again. There's no extra free verses over here. I needed to say uveged kilayim shatnez lo yaila alecha, right, putting it on, which we said it teaches us about the shawl. I needed to say lo silba shatnez, which says you have to be getting benefit from it. I also needed to say tzemer ufishtim, because from the first verse of, beged kilayim shatnez, which we say beged is wool and linen, but I might think that that's specifically lo yaila alecha, don't put it on, sort of not super benefity. So maybe that's why it's only wool and linen, but maybe when it says lo silba shatnez, don't wear it, maybe that means any two materials, because you're getting more benefit, so it applies in more cases. Any two materials are not allowed, therefore it says, no, lo silba shatnez tzemer ufishtim yachtav, it's only limited to wool and linen. So again, we need both psukim. We need the pasuk v'lo yada alecha, we need the pasuk v'lo silbash, we need it to say beged, we need it to say tzemer ufishtim. So imkin lishto kra mine v'tesi shatnez meha Allah. But still, says the Gemara, I don't need it to say I don't need it to say tzemer ufishtim. The pasuk could have just kept quiet and left out tzemer ufishtim, and I would have learned out exer shava of shatnez, right? It says uveged kilayim shatnez lo yaila lecha, it says lo silba shatnez. So I may have, right? So if we needed to learn that it's limited to wool and linen in both cases, whether it's lo yaila lecha, whether it's lo silbash. In both cases, it's wool. In both cases, it's wool and linen. If that's what we needed to learn, so I don't need it to say tzemer ufishtim in the context of lo silba shatnez, because I could just say it says shatnez in both cases, make exer shava and say that they're both talking about wool and linen. So how come the pasuk nonetheless says wool and linen? So it's to teach us that we juxtapose the wool and linen to the tzitzis and say that you can even make tzitzis out of wool and linen, that the mitzvahs Ahsay of tzitzis is dokhe, the mitzvahs sahsay of shatnez. And now affect the Gemara. V'tana dever bishmuel, time the cause of achman tzemer ufishtim. 1 second. According to the Tana of the Bismedrash of Bishmuel, the reason why we learn out that you can have shatnez by tzitzis is because it says tzemer ufishtim, right? Because by the Bismedrash of Bishmuel they said that memele beged, right? That when it says uveged kilayim shatnez liyada lecha, beged means tzemer ufishtim, as we learn out from Tzaras. So therefore, and then we could already make the gezer shava of shatnez to say that in all cases shatnez is limited to wool and linen. So how come I need in the second pasuk that it says gedilim lo silba shatnez tzemer ufishtim yachtav? How come it says tzemer ufishtim? To juxtapose wool and linen to tzitzis, to say that wool and linen is allowed for tzitzis. So now that v'tana dever bishmuel, time the cause of achman tzemer ufishtim. The reason why we know that you're allowed to make tzitzis even if it's shatnez, because it says lo silba shatnez tzemer ufishtim yachtav, and that is juxtaposed to gedilim taiselach halavachi kilayim b'tzitzis havamina do aser achmana. But otherwise, if not for the fact of the juxtaposition, I would have thought that shatnez is also for tzitzis. V'aksiv, but the pasuk says v'asu loim tzitzis al kanfe bigdayim. Right? It says v'asu loim tzitzis, that they'll make tzitzis al kanfe bigdayim, on the corners of their beged. V'tana dever bishmuel, and so Bismedrash of Bishmuel called begadim tzemer ufishtim, as we learned earlier, that according to the Bismedrash of Bishmuel, whenever it says beged, it means wool and linen. V'amar achman, and the pasuk says avid le tcheles, right? It says akon psil tcheles, that it should be tcheles, v'tcheles imrahu, and tcheles is wool. V'mad tcheles imrahu, how do I know that tcheles is wool? Mideshesh kitana tcheles imra. Well, from the fact that we know that sheish is linen, so we know that tcheles is wool. Fine. So, So fact the Gemara, 1 second. Is it true that according to the Tana of Rabbi Shmuel, the only way that I know that you're allowed to have kilayim, that you're allowed to have shatnez and tzitzis, is because of the juxtaposition, because of the extra verse of L'sul b'shatnez tzemer ufishtim yachtov, and that's juxtaposed to gedilim taiselach? Is that really how we know that you're allowed to have shatnez and tzitzis? But what about the fact that the pasuk says v'asulayim tzitzis akan v'vigdeim, that you'll make tzitzis on your beged, and they hold that beged is tzemer ufishtim, wool and linen, and we know akon psil tcheles, that the strings are going to be made of wool. Tcheles is wool, and therefore, if the Tana of Rabbi Shmuel holds that tzitzis can be made out of wool and linen, and the strings are memele going to be wool, so if you have a linen garment, memele, you're going to have woolen strings, and that's going to be shatnez. So I already know just from the psukim about tzitzis, it says akan v'vigdeim, right, that you're going to be putting it on your beged, which is wool or linen, and tcheles is wool. So memele, there's a possibility of shatnez in tzitzis. I don't need the juxtaposition of l'sul b'shatnez tzemer ufishtim yachtov next to gedilim taiselach. So, and for the Gemara, it's tuchsakadat chamina kirave. No, and I need the juxtaposition because I may have thought to say like Rave. We're gonna see what Rave says in a minute. But basically, Rave's opinion is that when it says akonov psil tcheles, it says akonov min konov, that you need to make the strings out of the same material as the garment. And therefore, I may have thought to say that, sure, when it says v'asulayim tzitzis akan v'vigdeim, they make tzitzis on their beged, and beged is wool and linen. So I may have thought to say, like Rava says, which is that, okay, well, if the garment is made out of wool, so then the strings need to be made out of wool. If the garment is made out of linen, so then the strings will be made out of linen. And when it says techeles, that needs to be this blue or whatever it is, let's say it's blue. So if and we said that this techeles is wool, so maybe what it's saying is that if the strings are wool, so then they need to be dyed techeles. But they could be linen. If they're linen, they just don't need to be dyed, right? My tzitzis, I just wear the white strings. Simple. Pashut or yid. Anyways, so where were we? So therefore, if I only had the psukim of v'asulayim tzitzis akan v'vigdeim, and beged is tzemer ufishtim, is wool and linen, I may have thought to say that when it says techeles, when it says akon of what does it say? Akon of pisil tcheles, Rav Nosson al tzitzis akon of pisil tcheles, that it says min konov, that it has to be the same material as the garment. So I may have thought to say that when it's that tzitzis have to be made out of wool and linen, because it says bigdeim. So the only materials that are allowed to be used for the garment of tzitzis are wool and linen. And I might think, like Rava, that if you have a garment of wool, so then the strings need to be wool. If you have a garment of linen, then the strings need to be linen. But you wouldn't be able to have woolen strings for a linen garment and linen strings for a woolen garment. I would think that wouldn't be allowed. Therefore, I need gedilim taiselach to teach me that no, actually, you are allowed to mix and match and say that you can have shatnez in tzitzis. Okay, fine. The Rami, now we're going to explain what Rava's opinion is. Rava's opinion is ksiva konov min konov. When it says the corner, so it means that the strings need to be of the same material as the garment. Uchsiv tzemer ufishtim. Yet the pasuk also says that it's specifically wool and linen, right? Because basically the point is that when it says akonov min konov, whatever the garment is, so just make sure that the tzitzis are the same material. So if the garment's made out of silk, make sure that the tzitzis are made out of silk. But then we say tzemer ufishtim, right? Then the pasuk says, right, right, which is saying that tzitzis specifically need to be made out of wool and linen. So what is it? Is it, can it be made out of any material, like including like silk, for example, just that make sure that the strings are silk also? Or is it saying tzemer ufishtim, specifically wool and linen? So aketzad tzemer ufishtim potrim bein b'minan bein shelo b'minan. Rather concludes Rave that look, wool and linen strings are universal strings. No matter what a garment is made out of, whether it's made out of wool, whether it's made out of linen, whether it's made out of silk, whether it's made out of anything else, if you have strings of wool or linen, that works universally. Sharminin, b'minan potrin, shelo b'minan ein potrin. But if you have a different type of string, so then if it's made, so let's say a silk string, so that's only going to work on a silk garment, nothing else. That is how Rave learns of that whole thing. But now, one second. One second. How could we say that I would have thought that the Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael would hold like Rave, that maybe, right, and therefore we would say that according to Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, when it says V'asulayim tzitzis akanfe v'gdeim, and beged is tzemer ufishtim, is wool and linen. So therefore, I may have thought like Rava says, that, well, what it means is that if you have a woolen garment, so they make the strings out of wool, and if I have a linen garment, they make the strings out of linen, but I wouldn't necessarily know that I can make them, mix and match and have shatnez. But why would we say that Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael would hold like Rava? He doesn't hold like Rava, because Rava says that you can make tzitzis out of anything. You can make them even out of silk. Just make sure that the strings are silk as well. Whereas Rabbi Yishmael, Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael says that specifically, it says V'asulayim tzitzis akanfe v'gdeim, and beged is limited to wool and linen. So nonetheless, it's tichsakadaitech. I may have thought to say ki diyuka derav. Still, I may have thought to say, the idea being like the sort of inference of Rava. Yeah, sure, Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael does not hold like Rava, because Rava says that tzitzis can be even made out of silk. Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael would not agree with that. It's limited to wool and linen according to him. However, he does concede that Rava does have an interesting point there, that it says hakanaf min kanaf, that when it says the corner, it means that the string should be made out of the same material as the corner. And I could argue that what the Torah is saying is that Ovid leit tzemer letzemer ufishtim lefishtim. That yes, while the two garments, right, Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael could argue that while the two materials that can be used for tzitzis are only wool and linen, but nonetheless, I might think, make woolen strings for a wool garment and linen strings for a linen garment. And when, right, as it says, right, we said tcheles is wool. Maybe what it's saying is that if you make a tzitzis out of wool, so then the strings should also be wool that are dyed blue. But I might think that I would not be able to mix and match, however. I would not be able to say that I can make woolen strings for linen or linen strings for wool. So therefore, therefore, says Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, it is not enough to only have the pasuk of Ve'asulayim tzitzis akanfe v'gdeim, that they'll make tzitzis on their beged, and beged is wool and linen, and it says that tcheles means wool, so memele, if you have a garment out of linen, you're going to be having wool strings, so therefore it's shadnes. No, that would not be enough, because I might think to say, like Rava, which is at a kanaf min kanaf, maybe what it means is that if I have a linen garment, so I need the strings to be made out of linen. If I have a wool garment, I need the strings to be made out of wool. That's why we need the pasuk of Lo silva shadnes tzemer ufishtim yachtav gedilim taiselach, to teach that tzitzis does in fact override shadnes, and I can even have woolen strings for a linen garment or linen strings for a wool garment, that shatnez is in fact overridden when it comes to tzitzis. Friends, what did you think of Daf Daled? That was like a real starke daf, huh? Wow. So Daf Daled really was predicated on the question of we had said that the way that we know that by Yibum you would not do Yibum with your wife's sisters, because we have a Gzeir Shava of Alea Alea. The implication being that if we did not have the Gzeir Shava, we would assume that Yibum would occur with your wife's sister. And we said the reason being Ahsay dokhe lo ta'asay, that the positive commandment of Yevamos yavo Alea would override the lo ta'asay of do not sleep with your wife's sister. And then we got into the whole discussion of how do we know that Ahsay is dokhe lo ta'asay. And ultimately, it got, we are trying to prove it from the fact that the pasuk says Gedilim Taiselach, it says Lo silva shatnes tzemer fishtim yachtov Gedilim Taiselach, that do not wear shatnes but do make tzitzis, and we ultimately are saying that you can even make tzitzis even if they are shatnes, that the mitzvah of tzitzis overrides the isser of shatnes, from which we will learn, you see, that a mitzvah Ahsay, a positive commandment, overrides a negative commandment. The positive commandment of tzitzis overrides the negative commandment of shatnes. Along the way, we also learned about the concept of smuchin, juxtapositions, that when verses are juxtaposed in the Torah, you can learn, right? You can learn out things from the juxtaposition of different verses. We saw that Rabbi Yehuda specifically only learns about it in Mishnah Torah, not necessarily the rest of the Torah. Alright, friends, that was Daf Daled of Masechta Yevamos. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.